Welcome back to The Narrative. I'm your storyteller, Callistra Farrier. Grenada getting ready, the government of Grenada, the parliament getting ready to debate the appropriations bill and the estimates of revenue and expenditure for 2024 next week, Friday. The amount that the government is expected to ask for is the budget to be is just over $1.6 billion. But we focus a lot on that big number when budgets are presented, but it's a bit more intricate than that on what's happening with revenue and expenditure, where's the money coming from, and where it's going to. Joining me on The Narrative now is Chris DeAllie, a former parliamentarian, private sector representative in the Senate, as well as an executive officer of a major manufacturing company in Grenada and an economics analyst. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you, Callistra. Pleasure to be here as usual.
1.6 billion. People get excited about how much the government's budget is every year, but it's a bit more than that. What are some of the finer points that we need to be paying attention given the national and global environment right now going into 2024?
Right. So I'm not surprised at the 1.6 billion. When you look at how the budget structured is normally of the current side and the capital side. So it'll be interesting to see what the PSIP part of the program of that budget of 1.6 billion and what the recurrent side is. The recurrent side is, of course, revenues and matches against the expenses every month. And what are the programs they're investing in, whether social or otherwise, to meet their monthly expenditure and the revenues to meet that. And just to put a little caveat in place, the budget is twofold. Is a list of your best wishes in terms of your programs and what you'd like to see happen in 2024, stemming from the throne speech that would have been done earlier. And then the next thing is to make sure you have the money to execute all the programs you're planning to execute. So essentially that is what we look at. And of course, legally, it gives the various ministries, through their votes, the authority to just spend what they're projecting to spend. So essentially, that is what will happen in the budget. And the debate is going to be around, whether or not the policies and the programs that they are listed is the right one for the country, debated by the opposition parliamentarians and so on, and they make their points. Accordingly, the government gets its budget passed. That is how it is. And they go through. Of course, some of us out here who do the analysis is concerned about particular aspects like the amount of spending that is going to take place. As an example, we know the Fiscal Responsibility Act had public sector wage pinned at 9% of GDP. The projection we expect through the Fiscal Resilience Bill that the government is proposing is to move that metric from 9 to 13% of GDP, which signals a significant increase in the public sector wage bill. And we see why that is happening. They've already given a 13% increase to public workers. They're regularizing a lot more staff and so forth, as well as contract staff coming in to meet the expectations of various ministries. So that is one area that the government will have to contend with as they go forward in 2024.
And as we spend more, we have to make more. It's natural. Do you anticipate that the government may look at areas to increase taxes? How do you expect that they will try to balance it out? I noticed when I look at the document, I haven't gone through it as thoroughly as I should, but I noticed that the Transformation Fund, the National Transformation Fund, features heavily in funding some of what the government intends to do in 2024. What else can we do?
So the government have cited, based on their last pronouncement, that tourism and construction will be the lead sectors with CBI to create additional revenues through economic activity in the country. So, for example, if you're using VAT as one of the major tax types to gain revenue from, with greater economic activity projected with an increase in GDP growth, which is projected, I think, to be 4.6 or 4.5% for 2024, you expect cross-border taxes as well as VAT will provide a major impetus for the revenue collection. And by that I mean, for example, VAT is at 15%. If the government was to increase VAT to say 17.5%, that is done. Most islands in the OECS are above 15% already. So I am one of those who believe that we may see an adjustment in the VAT rate, and the implications for the government to meet its challenges as it comes to expenses, increased expenses on their side. You may see some revisions to land tax, land and housing tax. That has been one of the best taxes in terms of compliance, and you may see some adjustments. They may or may not, depending on what they believe they can collect through the other tax types, corporation taxes, and so forth. If businesses continue to do well in the country, you expect that corporation taxes will be a bigger player in the whole combination of, because the economy essentially have stabilized in the sense that this new government have done well to ensure that the investor confidence in the economy remains high. And they have not done any major thing to taxes or adjust projects in any major way to stop them so that they don't have continuity in terms of people spending money for construction, building homes, and all of that. There's a lot of chat about relieving and giving concessions for environmentally friendly stuff like solar equipment and all of that. So that is positive from their side. And once they keep the investor confidence up, the average man would want to build his home, buy a vehicle, invest in one thing or the other. The banks will be happy. They have a lot of cash on hand, so they'll be happy to lend more. And that speaks well for that aspect of the economy and all they do. So that is the balancing act they have to play, Kalisha. They have to ensure that they keep that investor confidence high, economic activity remains relatively high, spending continues, notwithstanding inflation pressures. Spending continues at an elevated level so that internal taxes and cross-border taxes will increase.
Before we came on, we were talking about the areas where the government is spending a lot more in education, and so you had compiled a list?
Yeah, I had done a short list from what I've heard articulated. The government need to increase subvention to schools, for example, TAMCC, because they're waiving a lot of registration fees in some institutions, pre-primary, primary, and secondary school, no more registration fees. They're supporting. So once the government remove all of these fees, subvention to schools have to increase because the cost to run the school doesn't go down if anything is coming up. I think for TAMCC students, I had mentioned no more monies. They will give subvention for transport for students coming from far places to reach the TAMCC. They did mention CSEC reimbursement for students who would have sat CSEC and have to pay X amount of money. They're looking to give you some sort of reimbursement. I don't know on what conditions yet. Then you had public sector wage bill increasing on average 13% across the board. You have the regularization of a lot of public sector workers, including nurses and so on, which is a good thing. The minimum wage increase, particularly through the allowable, what it is now, the livable wage, and the impact from government. The possible more spending we'll have to do through NHI if that comes through. NIS have already going to be increasing from January. So you have all of these things that as additional costs that is going to come to the government and to the average man, and we need to understand how that is going to affect and if the budget is going to offer reliefs in certain areas to deal with that. From a private sector point of view, Kalisha, we would not like to see major changes to the fiscal arrangement, in particular the taxes, corporation income tax, annual stamp tax, and so on, because for us it's predictability and being able to project a year, 2 years ahead to understand how the taxes will impact our cash flows and the business. So we will always ask government to keep it steady as it is, or in the best case, reduce it. But we know that will be difficult every time. But for us, it is important that we understand the fiscal environment and how predictable it's going to be.
During the consultations, was there any indication, because I know private sector is one of the groups that was part of the consultation process, any indication government was leaning towards any sort of increase, particularly those that would impact?
No, the major thing was that the economy was performing well and that it continued to perform well and that they were being able to meet all their obligations. You are hearing little allegations and tremors out there that there have been a little late on paying claims that come to government. So I don't know if it's a cash flow issue. I'm not sure how true that is. But you are hearing some of these mutterings. There are people talking about their claims are being paid a little later than normal. And we just had an increase for parliamentarians. I don't know if it takes effect in 2024 or January or when. So you are going to see another increase coming on the wage bill as well. And it's just one of those things whether they can manage all that is coming and all that is planned. And that is the concern for some of us. We did suggest to them in the consultations that something they could consider is a VAT-free day that is done in other islands like Barbados and St. Kitts, and the impact on the economic activity when you do a VAT-free day. So we're hoping that we could see something come out of that as well.
A VAT-free day, the government gives up its VAT revenue in order to drive increased business to the business houses.
Correct. So it happens for one day or a VAT reduced Sunday. So some countries like St. Kitts, their VAT rate is 17.5. They will give up 12%, and the businesses contribute another 5.5. So customers will shop without no taxes in relation to VAT or consumer tax that day. But the spin-off is after that. After that VAT-free day, government will lose some revenue on the day, but the multiplier effect in terms of economic activity after significantly improves for the government in terms of the VAT collection.
The wage bill, the minimum wage, shifting the minimum wage upward, that is also an area of concern that has been talked about by various people in the private sector. That yes, it is the law, and we have not done it for a long time. But some people that I've spoken to feel like just that is going to be thrust upon them, that they have to do a significant increase where people were even above the minimum wage, but below what is now being set. They would still have to implement those increases that could affect the cost of living further, because that would be passed on by the business, by private sector.
Yeah, well, it's double effect. Some of us already, say for example, the construction sector, what is being proposed for the A, B, and C classes, some of us are already paying that. So it isn't going to significantly increase anything for us in those areas. And there are areas now where we are the minimum wage, the proposed minimum wage already, because of the competitive nature getting the right people to work and to work the way we want them to work. So that is already there for some of us. But the hotel sector is a sector that is going to see a significant change in the wage bill because of the minimum wage proposed adjustments. And the other important one is the livable wage, or the wages that is expected to pay for caretakers and domestic workers and so on. Some of us who employ people like that and are retired people will say to us, we can't afford you anymore at $1,200 plus that is being required, so we'll have to let you go. And there is a possibility of how we manage the fallout from that in those areas. So there is a labor component to it that some people may be released because of affordability, as well as the increases. Because remember, government is a major employer of people that fall in that area. Let's take the debushers, for example, and what they're being paid. They must now meet the minimum wage once it's passed at the projection that they're saying. So there is potential for increases for government on that side. Security workers and all of that, what happens there as well. So we will see an adjustment upwards generally, I believe. The magnitude of the adjustment is going to be the concern and how it impacts the labor climate. But we will see an increase, and as you say, it can put pressures in terms of spending power and inflationary pressures, because we will pass it on where it can be passed on. So it is something that will have to be looked at closely as we go forward.
Now, the issue of cost of living and inflation, we have been dealing with that. What kind of measures do you expect? The government already has measures in place. The cut on the gas tax is still in place. Not sure whether they are removing the concession they provided there, lowering it, bringing it right back up to the $5.50. But what other measures would you anticipate that the government needs to put in place to respond to the current conditions that exist related to inflation and cost of living? That
is a difficult one, Kalestra, because a lot of the inflation that we see now is imported inflation. The price of commodities and goods that's coming in, we have very little say on the price, and then which transferred to the consumer. So hence the inflation that we see, most of it is imported. I mean, we have the GRENADA thing that is now being discussed, moving from an average 3 month to interim billing issue based on the price of fuel. And I'm not sure how that will work in terms of an increased cost to the average consumer. So that is another kind of inflation thing internally that we have to deal with. Again, is imported pricing from the price of oil and so on, and what we could do with that or not do. And the pressures, you spoke about the 550 on the petrol, and I'm not sure what government is doing there. We see it going up significantly. Diesel was almost $17 or $17 in the last price change, and now it's down to 16 something. So there's a fluctuation there based on what they say comes in at the pump. But the inflationary thing, a lot of it will have to be dealing with what we get prices for coming in. I don't know if government have much say in how we do that. I always believe that, and I've always been controversial in this idea, that I think we need to look at the cost of labor on the ports. And when we compare ourselves to other ports in the region, we are significantly higher than a lot of them in terms of the wage bill. How that impacts inflation on the final goods is studies have been done, and it seems to be a major component. But these are things we need to look at and see if we could take a way or find a way to deal with it. Just as how we'll have to deal with the pension issue that is being discussed, and we look forward to hear what the government is going to propose in the budget, because that is going to be a major issue for government and how they deal with the pension issue and spending power for people. So these are things that may be difficult politically, the one in the port, for example, but it's something that we have to look at because we've been complaining for years of the wages on the port and its disparity with our counterparts in the region. So a lot of people tell you it's cheaper to bring in stuff in St. Lucia based on the calculation of duties and costs compared to Grenada. And, when you look at it, it raises some concern. So internally, there's few things we could do and look at. Efficiency is one, cost efficiencies in the government and how we could improve that so their costs come down. I've always said, just to divert a little, Calistro, I cannot understand why the Gazette is still done in hard copy and have to be posted out or sent out to people. When they do it on a system, digitally type it out, and all they need to do is save it and email it, and charge us the same fee for the subscription. I get it electronically. I don't have all this pile of paper. It's including the laws. I am not understanding why, up to this day, we can't get an electronic copy of the Gazette as a cost efficiency measure. I just say.
This is The Narrative. I'm on with economic consultant analyst Chris DeAllie, a former parliamentarian in Grenada, member of the Senate representing the private sector, as well as a chief executive officer of a leading manufacturing company in Grenada. We're discussing Budget 2024, the Dickon Mitchell-led administration getting ready to present its 2024 estimates of revenue and expenditure in the Parliament next week, Friday. More when we come back.